Hi, this is Tanya Becker, and I'm your host for today's episode of PartsVu Xchange Talks Boating. Captain Frank Lecardo, the owner and instructor at the Naples School of Boating, is back with me. Thanks so much for joining me, Frank.
Thank you, Tanya. It's great to be back.
Awesome. Frank, we came up with the idea for this episode because as the snowbird season started ramping up again down there in South Florida, November, December, you were again reminded how different boating in other parts of the country is. For instance, like a lot of new retirees, I think, come down there after years of boating on smaller lakes in the Midwest or bodies of water without much traffic, and they're excited to boat on Florida's waters, but have a bit of a rude awakening.
They sure do, Tanya. It can really be quite an adjustment for them.
Yeah, many of the waterways in Florida are incredibly busy, and some of the channels down there, you can easily enough get lost. After many years of boating very different bodies of water, a lot of boaters, I think, are embarrassed to admit they aren't really familiar with the rules of the nautical road. And collision is one of the leading types of accidents on the water. And I have a hunch a huge percentage of those collisions happen down there in Florida.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
And this isn't even taking into account all the new boaters who have taken up the hobby during the pandemic. I mean, there's been tons and tons of new boaters.
Yes, there have.
Yeah. And I mean, every boater needs to know the rules of the road, even if they don't commonly boat on busy waterways. I mean, they might have an interest in trying out boating in new places, or maybe sometimes places that aren't normally all that busy occasionally are. Like my family lives on a small lake in Southwest Ohio, and the 4th of July is crazy. Everybody wants to be out in the water to watch the fireworks, but they don't really know what they're doing. So it's
that's true. I actually found here in Florida that Black Friday was a very busy day on the waterways too. So
oh gosh, okay, well hopefully, yeah. So Frank, you and I worked together to create a boater's guide to the rules of the road based on questions people commonly ask you when they come into the Naples School of Boating. And we also reached out to the PartsVu community and gathered a few questions. Our listeners can find that guide in the show notes, and we're going to talk through it now. So let's start with an easy one, speed. Do bodies of water have speed limits like roads do?
Well, Tanya, our waterways do have some speed limits, yes, but it's not exactly like roadways. So, for example, here in Florida, you really need to pay attention to the signs. Out in the Gulf of Mexico, there is not an actual speed limit. It's up to the operator of the boat to determine what the safe speed is. So we determine safe speed by looking at factors like the wind, wave heights, visibility, how many passengers are on board the boat, how much boat traffic there is. All that kind of plays a factor into, determining what the safe speed is, all right? And then as you enter into the inland channelways and waterways, the marked speed restrictions really start to begin. Some areas are slow, no-wake areas. Some areas are 20 to 30 miles an hour in the marked channel, but as soon as you leave the channel, it becomes a no-wake again. And then some areas are slow, no-wake during certain times of the year. So, for example, to protect manatees. So it may say, during a certain season, it's no-wake, but the rest of the time you can do 30 miles per hour. So it's really important to just basically read the signs, pay attention to what they're telling you.
Absolutely. I mean, does the Coast Guard pull people over occasionally for speeding, operating recklessly?
It's usually not the Coast Guard. It's usually local law enforcement, maybe the county sheriff or the local marine police. But yes, they do, in typical areas. So for here in Naples, it's, Gordon Pass. There's usually a police officer kind of sitting by the pass where the no-wake zone is. And, he'll blip the siren at you if you're still making a wake, and he'll motion for you to slow it down a little bit. But yes, they do tend to enforce them, especially in the busy, more restricted waterways. They definitely have an enforcement going on.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So here's where I think people start getting a little confused. Which boat has the right of way in different scenarios?
Yeah, this one can be a little bit confusing. There is a good set of rules for it, but I will say the ultimate rule is always watch out for the other guy. But let's go through the official rules first. So the 3 most common scenarios for power boats are meeting head on, passing while going in the same direction, which is known as overtaking, and then crossing while going in different directions. So let's just familiarize ourselves with a little bit of terminology here. So the give way vessel in these scenarios has to yield to the other vessel. So you're giving way to them, right? The stand-on vessel is the one that has the right of way. You stand on. You continue your course. You continue your speed. So if you hear those terms, that's what they're referring to. So let's talk about the first one, which is meeting head-on. In this scenario, both vessels should move to the starboard or to the right-hand side and pass each other port to port, or left-hand side to left-hand side. So basically, this one is the same as two cars, heading towards each other on a roadway. They both move to the right, and you pass on the left of each other. So that's the first scenario. In this case, there is no stand-on or give-way vessel, and this can be confusing sometimes because both vessels have an obligation to do something. They each have to move to the right. So there's not a give-way and a stand-on in that case. All right. In this situation of an overtaking or passing situation, both vessels are moving in the same direction, and the vessel approaching from behind is the give-way vessel until he has passed the other vessel. So once he's passed the midship on that other boat, then he becomes the stand-on, and the boat that got passed becomes the give-way. All right, so that's that scenario. All right. Yeah. In a crossing situation, if a boat is approaching you from the starboard or right-hand side, they are the stand-on and you are the give-way vessel. So if you look to your right and you see a boat coming across the front of your boat, you're going to have to give way to them. So you have two choices in that scenario. You can either maintain your course and reduce your speed and let them go, or you can maintain your speed, alter your course, and go behind them. But either way, when you cross that boat's wake, you should see them on your left-hand side. That's the proper way to do that. Okay?
That makes sense.
So again, I mentioned the most important rule of all is the rule to take action to avoid collision. So there comes a point when it doesn't really matter who's right and who's wrong. You have to just avoid the collision. Okay. I can't stress that enough. It leads me to a very good point. The number one cause of boating accidents in 2020, according to the Coast Guard, was lack of paying attention. And that leads us into what we call situational awareness. Our waterways, especially here in South Florida, get very busy and very crowded in the winter months, and boaters need to have eyes in all directions. I can't tell you how many times I see boat operators who are just, changing direction and just kind of drifting about without even looking to see if another boat is approaching. And honestly, that's how the collisions happen. People just, they're not paying attention to what's going on behind them as much as what's going on in front of them. So you really have to have eyes in all directions.
Yes. Yeah, to your point, as I was learning how to drive a boat, and a car too, for that matter, number one rule was told to me: never be in the same place at the same time as another boat. So
I like it. That's good. That sounds like my docking rule, which is never approach anything faster than you'd like to hit it.
Yeah, I like these words of pearls of wisdom.
You're right.
So let's get to a little bit more advanced areas. Aids to navigation are the road signs of the water. I mean, what are the main types of navigation aids out there?
Well, so first, Tanya, let's talk about the two categories. We have lateral and we have non-lateral. The lateral markers are directional. They tell us where to go, or more importantly, where not to go. And they basically guide us from one point to another. So those are going to be your red and green buoys, your red and green, day marks and things like that. The non-lateral signs are informational. They inform us about areas such as no-wake zones and hazard areas. So those are really the two most common types of markers that you're going to see.
Yeah. And I think this is where people start really getting confused, because you don't see these types of markers in a lot of places necessarily.
Yeah, a lot of inland lakes, a lot of private lakes, you won't have these kinds of markers and signs. And so when you start seeing them, it can be a little bit confusing. But, if you take a basic safe boating course, maybe do some on-water training, it becomes easier to understand them and to follow them.
Absolutely. Why are some buoys and beacons red and others are green?
Well, I'm not sure why the Coast Guard picked red and green, but I do know this. The red markers should be on your right-hand side when returning from sea, and the green marker should be on your right-hand side when going out to sea. So as I like to say, it's red, right, return, and green means go. If you're going out, you're keeping the green on the right-hand side. If you're coming back in, you're keeping the red on the right-hand side.
I like it. An easy little device to remember. So that's easy enough. What information is included on buoys and beacons, and why is this information important to boaters?
Yeah, this is a really great question. There's three ways to identify an aid to navigation. It's color, shape, and number. All right. So when we see a red ATON, the red ATONs will always be a triangle and they'll always have an even number. So I did a training once for a guy that was colorblind. And so for him, it was all about the shape and the number. If he saw a triangle, he knew it was red. If he saw a square, he knew it was green. And then when he saw the number, if it was an even number, he was able to confirm that, yes, that in fact was a red marker. So it's color, shape, and number. So the greens will always be square and they'll always have an odd number. The reds will always be triangle and have an even number. And the reason the numbers are important is because by following the number sequence, you can also determine whether you're going inland away from sea or whether you're getting closer to sea. So if the number sequence is increasing, you're going further inland. If the number sequence is decreasing, you're going further out to sea, or in our case, the Gulf of Mexico. So that's the other reason why we have number sequence.
That's really good to know for people to know. I mean, that's you definitely don't encounter that in an inland lake. That's for sure.
Definitely not.
So there's also information in regulatory marks, right? I mean, what sort of information is shared on these markers?
Yes, these are the non-lateral markers that I mentioned before, and basically they indicate speed restrictions, hazard areas, manatee zones, and information like that. So yes, they're very important, but they're not giving you direction; they're just giving you information. The hardest part about these signals is reading them from a distance, honestly. But there is a trick that I have found. So, for example, there'll always be a white sign. So if it's a no wake zone or a manatee zone, it's always going to be a rectangle-shaped white sign with an orange border around it. The trick to knowing what that sign says from a distance is whether or not it has a circle in the middle or a diamond shape in the middle. If it's a circle in the middle, it's a speed restriction. It's telling you to slow down. And you won't know the exact speed limit until you get closer to it, but if you see a circle in the distance, you should know that it's something related to speed. If you see a diamond, it's a hazard area or a caution area, and it's probably something you don't want to get too close to. So that's how you can tell what a sign is indicating from a little bit more of a distance.
That's super helpful. And I did not know that, actually. So that's good. What other types of markers might boaters encounter?
The one that we have here in Naples that I always cringe when I see people anchoring too close to it, we have a do not anchor cable crossing sign. So this is a really important one. You never want to anchor your boat when you see a sign that says cable crossing. You may see them at bridges or in areas where power, phone, or fiber optic cables are being supplied to, say, an island from the mainland. So catching your anchor on one of these would be really bad.
I got it. Yeah. Literally like a cable crossing, like electric cable or something like that. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah. That would be not good. Finally, what about lighting? Which lights are boats of different sizes required to have?
Well, for power boats, there's three navigation lights to be concerned with. When you're a vessel underway, meaning you're not anchored or you're not tied to a dock, a power boat must display a red and green running light as well as the white anchor light. However, if that boat is then anchored, it must turn off the red and green lights so that other vessels know you're anchored and not underway. So remember, if you're a vessel at anchor, other vessels are required to avoid you. If you're anchored and still displaying your red and green running lights, other vessels can be confused and think that they may have the right of way over you when in fact they don't. So if you're a vessel anchored, only leave the white light on. If you're a vessel underway, leave the white light on and then turn on your red and green.
Got you. And so those three lights are the important lights that everybody needs to know about. And there's not additional lighting that's really all that critical.
As far as navigation, no, it's the white, red, and green. And you'll have other lighting that, on the boat. So for example, to light up the floor area so you don't trip and fall as you're maneuvering about. But that's not a navigation light. So the red, white, and the green are your navigation lights.
Got it.
And Tanya, if I can just add one more thing, there's another rule that's not commonly known, and it's come up a few times in some of the on-water trainings that I've done. It's when two vessels are going under a bridge in opposite directions, The vessel that has the current pushing it from behind has the right of way, or is the stand-on vessel. A lot of folks don't know this. I think it's not commonly quoted in the basic safe boating courses, but as you go more advanced and you take some of the Coast Guard classes, it is an actual rule in there. And the theory behind it is that the vessel that has the current pushing it has less maneuverability and therefore should go first. Right. So this is actually, it's called Rule Number 9 in the Coast Guard Rule Book, which I think we have a PDF of that maybe we can share with our listeners too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And you have a lot of these like narrow passages and bridges and so forth down there in Florida, right?
Yeah, we do. We have quite a few where it's a little bit tight to get two boats through there at the same time. So that's why I mentioned to our listeners that, if the current is pushing the other boat from behind, he should go first.
Yeah, that's great. And that was another thing I did not know. So that was really interesting to learn. Well, this was so helpful, Frank. I mean, I think this is going to be really helpful to people listening out there, and definitely everyone should download the guide. I've included a link in the show notes. And also, if you're in the South Florida area and need some on the water training, definitely go to naplesschoolofboating.com. Frank is happy to help you. And thanks again for joining us, Frank. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tanya, and thanks to our listeners. Glad to help anybody that needs some help on the water.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the PartsVu Xchange Talks Boating Podcast. Are you in a dock war with your boating neighbor for the cleanest boat? Check out our marine soaps, polishes, waxes, and more at PartsVu.com. And for free shipping, use the coupon code PVTalksShine, a special perk for our podcast listeners. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram for boating knowledge, to keep in touch with the PartsVu community, and for special sales and promotions. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast, and check out the show notes for the coupon code just mentioned, more information about PartsVu and the products we offer, as well as our boating blog, the PartsVu Xchange. And a big thanks to Mind for performing the original music featured within this podcast.